Hi friends, it's Chuba. Welcome back to my channel. I hope you had a really good June. I know I did. I read quite a lot of books and they were all really good for the most part. I think there was maybe one that I was a little unsure of, and we'll get into that when we start my wrap up. But grab your beverage of choice and we'll get started. Enjoy watching. This first book that I want to share is Keep What Remains by Carrie Beamer. What's really special about this story is that Carrie Beamer is not only a YA author, but she's also my coworker, which is so cool. She works in email marketing by day, just what I do, and she writes stories by night. This is her first book that she wrote in 2020, and then I know that she has two more that have come out since then. This is a YA coming of age story about our main character. Her name is Megan and she is 16 years old. She is just trying to get through her high school years and she has an overprotective father. So she's not really allowed to go out, have boyfriends, party and whatnot. On the other hand, you have Megan's best friend, Tessa. Tessa is kind of that wild child that we have and really gets Megan out and about. One night, Tessa takes Megan to a party where Megan meets Jason and they hit it off quite quickly. They end up falling in love. So this is a story about young and first love. I have to say it's not all just butterflies and happy emotions, but this is also a very emotional story as you keep reading into the plot and as you get a little bit more into the life of Megan and how she is dealing with some family drama and tragedy that happens. You also learn a little bit more about Jason's family too, and nothing is as perfect as it seems. This is such a sweet, sweet story, and the ending had me in tears. This story has a lot of adolescent nostalgia for me specifically, and I think if you read it too, you'd probably think back to your time growing up as a kid. It was a really good one. It was beautiful and happy, but it was also really emotional and tragic. The ending will just have you in tears. I highly recommend this story. I know that this is a young adult story, but I think anyone can read it and anyone should. Now, this next book is a book that I absolutely loved and one of my favorite books in the month of June, and it is Beach Read by Emily Henry. This was the only book that I had to read by Emily Henry before finishing all 5 of her stories. I am so glad that it was happenstance that I ended with this book. It is my absolutely favorite Emily Henry story. This is a book about Augustus and January, and they are both writers. They're both best-selling novelists. Augustus writes fiction and then January writes romance novels, and they really have never gotten along since college. They went to the same college together, and so the summer does come and January ends up living in her father who passed away, his house that he gives to her. And then of course her neighbor, who is Augustus, ends up living there as well for the summer. Augustus is there because he has writer's block, and January is there is because she's trying to recover from her father's passing. So there's just a lot of emotions going on in this vicinity, and I really love the forced proximity and the enemies to lovers. But what I think is so sweet about this particular story is that it's more of enemies to friendships to lovers. I think it's so sweet that yes, they're forced to communicate with each other, but because of that, they're really rekindling their friendship or their frenemy friendship, and they're getting to know each other and they become friends and they cope and deal with all these emotions together before they fall in love. And I thought that was so sweet and I really did enjoy that. It made it feel more real. It made it feel like the love story was just real. As with any other Emily Henry story, this is not just a love story. It is a story about loss and recovering from that loss and trauma, and it's very heartfelt. It's a really good one, and I'm so glad I read it. I thought the setting was unique, the story was unique, and I also have to say what I liked about it is that they both end up having a little competition with each other to see if they can write stories that are the other person's genres. So Augustus says that he will write a love story and a romance novel. He doesn't believe in love, but January does. And then January says that she will write a fiction story kind of like Augustus's. So this little game is really fun as well, and that's just a small little plot in the whole story that we have, and it's a really fun one. I am glad that I saved it for last. It was so good. I loved it. This next one is going to be a twofer. I did not read these books back to back, but I did read them in the month of June, and they are the Rebel Ranch series. We have two that are out right now, Done and Dusted, and then Swift and Saddled. Both were really, really fun. These were my first cowboy romance stories. This first one was really fun. I go into detail, and I have a whole reading vlog that I'll link up that you can watch, but I really enjoyed this story. This is the start of the Rebel Blue Ranch story, and we follow Clementine. She goes by Emmy Ryder, and she's a sibling in the Rebel Blue Ranch. She ends up leaving for college, and she comes back because she goes through something really traumatic while she's riding and competing on her horse. And so she kind of runs away from that and moves back home. She ends up rekindling old flames with Luke Brooks, who she has known since childhood because Luke is her oldest brother's best friend. So there's a little bit of forbidden love in here, which I really enjoyed. I think that a lot of the romances I've been reading have the same tropes, so it was fun to read something different. I enjoyed it. The characters specifically were not my favorite, but overall, I love the setting of Rebel Blue Ranch in Wyoming. I loved Emmy's father, Amos Ryder. He's so sweet, and I really liked Emmy's best friend and the different characters that you meet and are intertwined in this story. Overall, it was really fun, and I'm glad I read it. I have to say though that Swift and Saddled is my favorite of the two so far because it is about Emmy's middle brother, Wes, and Wes is so sweet. He is so caring and lovable. He's like a golden retriever. He wants to please people. He just has such a good heart. Don't be fooled, because Lyla Sage in this story specifically does a really good job of talking about mental health and depression, because Wes does end up having depression. So that is a trigger warning to be wary of. It talks a lot about therapy and depression medication and how Wes is coping with it, and there are good days and bad days and nothing is perfect. And I really like the way that Lyla Sage structured the writing around Wes, since he is a main character and since mental health is so important. She writes it that way, and I really liked that a lot. I also did like Ada. She is the main female character. She is hired to renovate Wes's dream project on the ranch, and it is to rebuild the home that Amos used to live in. So that's why Ada comes along, and Ada is Emmy's best friend from college. So everyone is really intertwined and tangled, and I really loved that. I realized that I love interconnected standalones. I love series like this because you already know the story, you're already immersed into the setting, you already know some of the characters, and I think that's what makes it so much more special. You have that connection, and I really felt that when I was reading this story, and I love the sprinkle in of Emmy and Brooks in this story as well. And I cannot wait for the third one, Lost and Lassoed, because it's going to be about Gus, who is the oldest Ryder brother. They're just really fun. If you need a steamy summer romance, these books are going to be for you. This next story kind of matches my shirt, and it is The 7-Year Slip by Ashley Poston. This is my first book by Ashley Poston, and now I need to go pick up her backlog and her newest story that recently released, because I loved this story. I thought it was so unique and fresh. This time travel romance is something that I've never read before. Our main female character, her name is Clementine. There's a lot of lemons in here. Her name is Clementine. She doesn't go by Emmy though. She just goes by Clementine, I'm pretty sure. I can't remember, but yeah. She goes by Clementine. I've said that so many times. We need to move on from this. She is a book publicist, but she ends up moving into her aunt's apartment because her aunt passed away recently. And she was so close with her aunt. They always traveled together. They experienced love and loss together. They were just the best of friends. And her aunt passes away and Clementine is having a really hard time, but she needs to pay the bills and she can't afford her apartment. So her aunt gives her this apartment for her to live in and she ends up moving in. But the thing about this apartment is that it is magical. One day Clementine walks into her apartment and it is not what it seems. It's not how she left it with boxes everywhere since she was just moving. She is taken back 7 years prior and there is a man who is in her apartment. I'm just going to leave the story at that because it goes from there and it is very sweet and I loved it a lot. I really liked our main female character, but I also really liked our main male character. His name is Iwan, I-W-A-N, and it is the weirdest pronunciation. I could not figure it out for the longest time, but it is Iwan and he is a chef. Things slowly add up from the past to the present and it is so much fun. I think the writing style was really well written and it was easy to follow, especially since we are time hopping back and forth, and it was such a sweet story. This next book is a book that I didn't read from start to finish. I mean, I guess I did read it from start to finish, but it took me more than a month to read it because I was buddy reading it with my friend Seiki, and it is The Great Reclamation by Rachel Heng. We both were given a copy of this book from Riverhead Books to read since the paperback version had just come out, so we decided to buddy read it together. We started in May, but we didn't finish it until June, and I'm really glad that I took my time reading this story. This is a historical fiction, magical realism story. I would not have read this book if I wasn't given this copy to me, but it was such a beautiful story. This is a book about our main character. His name is Ah Boon, and he is a child living in coastal Singapore in the 20th century. He is living in this village with his family, and to survive, they fish. They do what they can to put food on the table. It's not just about that though. This story has a lot of historical relevance to it because we learn about the history of Singapore. We learn about the Japanese invasion of Singapore and then British control as well. And we learn a little bit about how Singapore came to be. And what is very special about this story to me specifically is that I have been to Singapore. I've been to Singapore and Malaysia. I went back with my family, I think when I was in college. So I think around like 2013. So it's really interesting to remember my time in Singapore and be able to read about how it is now. So I just thought that was really fun and different for me and why I really appreciated a story like this. When I say that there's magical realism to it is that Ah Boon, one day, he ends up seeing this magical island that pops up. And this magical island is a blessing because with it, there is so much fish to fish and they're prospering with this island and it's essentially helping the village survive. But then the island goes away and so time goes by and it's just really interesting to have that historical fiction and then we have this magical island to it. It was really good and I highly recommend it if you like historical fictions and magical realisms. I'm very glad I read this. This next book is the final book in the Caraval trilogy. It is Finale by Stephanie Garber. I finally finished the series and I am so glad that I read it. It's just so fun and unique. I know I mentioned this before, but this is just a story that you're immersed into. This is a story about this traveling circus named Caraval, and then there's this this quest within it. It's a set of games that you can either play or watch if you have a ticket. And when I was reading these stories, I felt like I was in Caraval. I felt I was in the story with our two main characters, Donatella and Scarlet. It was so much fun. I think the story wrapped up the series really well, and I love that I got to start with it from Scarlett's perspective and then read through from Donatella's perspective in the second book. And then by the third story, we get both of their viewpoints. There were definitely a lot of plot twists in this third book that I did not see coming at all. It ended up just really matching up to the whole story, and it was very, very fun. I highly recommend if you want something easy to read. And when I say easy to read, I meant like it's something that you don't want to put down. You are immersed into the experience, and it's a series that you want to keep picking up and you want to go back to. So this was really fun, and I cannot wait to read Stephanie Garber's other series, Once Upon a Broken Heart. I will say and suggest that if you haven't read either series before, to read the Caraval trilogy before you read Once Upon a Broken Heart, because there are some characters that we meet in these stories that show up in Once Upon a Broken Heart. All right, so this one might be a shocker. I have to say, I was expecting to really like it. I had high expectations. Everyone was saying it was really good. And maybe that's my fault because I was going into it just thinking I was going to love it, and I ended up not. This is the book that I was talking about when I was saying that there's one book that I'm unsure about, and it is Powerless by Lauren Roberts. There is so much talk about this story. This story is about the kingdom of Ilia, and you have the elites and then you have the ordinaries. The elites are humans with supernatural powers, and they're basically superhuman. They have abilities from like elemental magic to strength to invisibility to all kinds of different magical forces. And then you have the ordinaries who don't have any powers at all. The king of Ilia, long ago, decided that, and I don't know if he started this rumor or not, but he basically said that all of the ordinaries, so the ordinaries need to be killed off and banished because they are ruining the elite's powers. And the ordinaries are the reasons why that the elites are like not as powerful as they used to be. Big if true. He said that, and so now in this world of Ilia, there should not be any ordinaries at all. Our main female character, her name is Pei, and she has no powers. She's an ordinary, but she's in disguise as a elite. She ends up being put into the purging trials, which also is really weird to me because these purging trials are a set of trials that the elites fight in for basically to win. The elites are killing each other. I'm like really confused as to why in this story the king wants to kill the elites when he killed all the ordinaries to save the elites. Do you know what I'm trying to get at? Very bizarre, okay? It's fine. The story ended up being okay, and I'm going to read the second story because I want to know if it's just this book that didn't do it for me, or if it is just the writing and the plot. It reminds me a lot of the Hunger Games and a little too much like the Hunger Games. I love a good set of trials plot line. We have Fourth Wing, which I think is really fun. Obviously I like the Hunger Games, but I don't know, this was just a little too similar. I don't want to open a can of worms because I understand that people and authors are allowed to get their ideas from other authors and sprinkle that in, but this one just disappointed me a little bit. We'll see, and I will let you know when I read Reckless and my thoughts on it. This last book that I want to talk about that I read in the month of June is Caliban's War, which is the second book in the Expanse series by James S.A. Corey. This is a part of the giant space opera that I'm trying to reread and finish, and I'm doing a pretty good job. These are hefty books. They're like 600 pages, so I'm trying to read one each month. What I really like about these books is that in each story we're introduced to a new character and a new set of characters that drives the plot even forward. There is this big plot and storyline about this proto-molecule that is kind of made by humans, and then now it's turning into something bigger and scarier than what it should be. So think like alien invasion. And the Mars, Belt, and Earth, there are 3 different forms of governments within the Expanse universe, and they are trying to figure out and navigate how to stop this proto-molecule and how to survive without killing each other. So it's really fun. We still have the same characters from the first book, our main characters, Holden and his crew, and it's really interesting to see how their storyline connects to all of these characters that we're introduced to in the new books that we do get. I'm really enjoying rereading these stories, and I can't wait to finish the story. And yeah, next month I'll be reading the 3rd one. Of course, my battery died right as I was finishing up. I'm going to leave it at that. Those are all of the books that I read in the month of June. If you read any of the same books that I read, let me know in the comments down below what you thought of them. And if you have a favorite from the month of June that you think I should read, let me know down in the comments as well. Until next time, I will see you in another video next Friday. Have a good week. Bye, everybody.